In his memoirs dedicated to the Second World War, Winston Churchill wrote that the only reasons that seriously made him fear that Britain might lose the war to Germany were the German submarines. In the small town of Lebow, located in the north of Germany, right on the beach, is the last surviving submarine of the Type 7. It was precisely these submarines that caused Winston Churchill to worry and were the most serious threat in the Atlantic Ocean in the early 1940s. Germany was strictly prohibited from having submarines, developing, and building them, as per the Treaty of Versailles. However, to preserve its submarine school and to consolidate the experience gained from the previous war, in 1922, the Shipbuilding Design Bureau was registered in The Hague, with its staff consisting of German engineers. This company offered submarine designs based on the German submarines from the First World War to many countries. The B-3 project was developed in parallel. It was named mobilization submarines. The larger submarines were classified under the first series, and the smaller submarines with a displacement of 500 tons would become the future project of the 7th series. It was assumed that if and when Germany found itself at war, naturally, the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty would no longer apply, and submarines of this type could be quickly built in large quantities. Further development of the submarines of the 7th series and their embodiment in metal became possible thanks to the Maritime Agreement concluded in 1935 between Germany and Britain. According to this treaty, Germany could have a fleet, the total tonnage of which would not exceed 1/3 of Britain's fleet. Regarding submarines, Germany obtained the right to be on par with Britain. The most important thing was that this submarine was very simple to build due to its robust construction, which allowed for extensive use of welding. With these submarines, a vast number could be constructed in a relatively short time. What was maintained in the design of the Type 7 submarines from the First World War was the essential principle. The submarine had excellent balanced characteristics up to a certain size. However, once the submarine exceeded a certain size, it encountered problems with maneuverability underwater, and with surfacing and diving, extra appendages did not lead to increased performance. On the contrary, they affected the maneuvering capabilities of the submarine. The maneuvering qualities are no less important than combat ones. In the B modification, the designers made a fundamental improvement, the double vertical rudder. This significantly reduced the turning circle's diameter, providing tactical advantages. The 7th type submarines, known as the 7C model, were produced en masse. There were two subtypes in this category, 7C41 and 7C42. The technical specifications of the U-995 submarine are as follows: length, just over 67 meters; width, slightly more than 6 meters; average draft, 4.7 meters; submerged displacement, 871 tons. In this modification, to accommodate the new hydrophone equipment, the submarine's hull was increased by one frame, approximately 60 centimeters. The addition of just one frame also increased the fuel supply by 20 tons, although it had a negative impact on the speed of the submarine. It lost about half a knot of underwater speed. The submarine's hull was reinforced, and the stern and bow sections, side bulges, and deck superstructure were welded to the robust hull. The robust hull's maximum diameter near the conning tower is almost 5 meters, with the thickness of the robust hull ranging from 18.5 to 21.5 millimeters. The robust hull of the submarine is divided into 6 compartments. The first is the bow torpedo compartment. The second is the bow battery compartment with officer cabins on the platform. The third is the central control room with the conning tower situated above it, the commander's position during an attack. The fourth is the living compartment with the galley, and below deck, the second group of battery cells. The fifth is the diesel compartment. The sixth is the stern torpedo compartment, where 2 electric motors were also located. The primary ballast was distributed in 5 tanks, 2 in the light hull, 2 in the side ballast keels, and 1 in the robust hull beneath the deck of the third compartment. 3 of these tanks could also be used for fuel storage. Armament included 5 torpedo tubes with a caliber of 533 mm and a reserve of 14 electric torpedoes G7. German submariners called them Ugal, coal. Remarkably, it was developed in 1929, but its design was so successful that it continued to be produced in various modifications until 1944. In the latest versions, the torpedo was self-guided and equipped with an internal heating system, allowing it to travel 7.5 kilometers at a speed of 30 knots. In terms of artillery, the submarine initially had an SKC-35 gun with an 88mm caliber. However, with changing combat scenarios from 1942, the Type 7 submarines began to reinforce their anti-aircraft armament. On U-995, a 37mm flak M42U gun and 20mm flak 38 anti-aircraft guns were installed. The power plant consisted of 2 diesel engines with a maximum combined power of 3,200 horsepower and 2 electric motors with a total power of 750 horsepower. There were 2 groups of battery cells, each containing 62 elements. In this modification of the submarine, the reconfiguration of the power system saved 11.5 tons, allowing an increase in the thickness of the robust hull. As a result, the maximum operational depth increased to 120 meters, with a maximum depth of 300 meters. The submarine was equipped with a snorkel system to allow the diesel engines to operate underwater. The maximum surface speed was 17 knots, while the submerged speed was 7.6 knots. The range of action in surface position was 8,000.5 nautical miles with an economical speed, and in submerged position, it was 80 miles at a speed of 4 knots. The submarine had a cruising autonomy of 40 days. In favor of the ship's combat qualities, they sacrificed practically everything. One bunk was shared by 2 crew members, and some managed to sleep on torpedoes. All available space was filled with provisions, and even one of the 2 galleries was used for storage. During the first week of the voyage, the crew avoided using the galley because it was fully packed with provisions. To get an idea of what the crew breathed, it was a mixture of diesel exhaust, kitchen odors, and a dense cologne aroma, as they had no opportunity for proper washing. The crew spent a long time practicing on their boats and training areas. They performed numerous torpedo launches in various conditions, with several dozen torpedo launches for practice. Therefore, when the boat finally set out on a voyage, it was a familiar, well-practiced routine for them, essentially automated, allowing them to achieve significant results. This bunk was slightly larger than all the others for the sake of the ship's combat qualities. The horizontal rudder controls had electric actuation. A hydraulic system for control was also provided as a backup. When the order to dive was received, the rudders were positioned as necessary, with the main ballast controlled by these valves. The ballast tank valves gradually opened when the bunk reached a certain angle. The differential control was managed by this device, but often, for faster submersion, a rather original method was used. All the off-duty personnel quickly moved to the bow compartment. All of these actions were rehearsed to the point of automation during training. During actual combat conditions, the well-prepared crew could submerge the submarine from a surface position to a depth of 10 meters in 25 to 27 seconds, which was considered the best result in the world at the time. In the summer of 1939, Germany's top leadership had finally formulated a strategic task for the German Navy, the destruction of British merchant shipping. Only torpedo submarines could best accomplish this, and the more of them there were, the faster this task would be solved. On September 3rd, U-30 sank the British liner Athenia, marking the start of World War II at sea. The sinking of the liner immediately created a certain reputation for the Type 7 submarines and all of Germany's submarine forces in the eyes of the Allies, who began to arm civilian vessels with artillery to counter submarines. In response, the Germans declared unrestricted submarine warfare and began mass-producing submarines. The torpedo tubes of the Type 7 submarines were not much different from those of other navies. However, they had some interesting features. For example, the torpedoes were ejected using a pneumatic piston rather than compressed air, which provided an advantage of no bubble wake during torpedo firing. Additionally, torpedoes could be programmed to set their course, speed, and depth without removing them from the torpedo tube. This was achieved through a mechanical system connected to the torpedo's external connectors, allowing the necessary parameters to be set either here or in the control room. Simple to control, reliable, and cost-effective, the Type 7 submarines had well-balanced combat and operational qualities. Regarding its structural features, the submarine was not designed for prolonged combat use due to its unique characteristics, such as rapid submersion and extreme depth, which made it nearly invulnerable. With the beginning of World War II, the German Navy had perhaps the best weapon for submarine warfare at its disposal, well-prepared crews, and only one person knew how to use it to the maximum effect. Karl Donitz was an experienced submarine commander who conducted numerous successful operations in the Mediterranean during World War I. Starting in 1935, he had a significant influence on the development of Germany's submarine forces. He developed tactics that were later used by submarines, including the so-called Wolfpack tactic. In this tactic, each submarine assumed its assigned position, so the entire group formed a line crossing the convoy's expected route. The spacing and distance between submarines allowed for a high probability of detecting a passing convoy with at least one submarine. Information on the convoy's location and course could also be obtained through radio reconnaissance or aircraft. All this information flowed into the Coastal Operational Center, which coordinated the group's actions and directed nearby submarines towards the convoy. When a submarine detected a convoy, it transmitted its location to the center and continued to monitor from a safe distance. At night, it made a dash towards the convoy, then surfaced and launched torpedo attacks. The submarine was practically invisible at night, with poor visibility meaning it had to be actively searched for and detected. Unlike destroyers, which might drop depth charges if they spotted a submarine, a Type 7 could launch torpedoes at the target without revealing its presence. If you have further questions or need additional information, feel free to ask. It's clear that she switched to the other side and struck. Since there were many such boats, the attacks they launched were almost simultaneous. This led to the convoy's defense starting to break apart. They would attack one, then the second would approach, and then the third. Consequently, one submarine and each successive one would approach the convoy that had no protection. This resulted in very significant losses in this situation, as it allowed for very rapid and effective destruction. On October 17, 1940, the submarine U-38 detected convoy SC-7. The submarine reported the coordinates of the convoy to the headquarters of Admiral Donitz in Lorya, which were instantly relayed to nearby patrolling submarines. Over the next day, submarines that had gathered into a wolfpack attacked 3 ships of the convoy. Meanwhile, a lone escort ship, the corvette HMS Gladiolus from the UK, arrived to assist the convoy. By the end of the day, 7 submarines had concentrated around the convoy. The night of October 18th to 19th presented ideal conditions for the submarine hunters, with a full moon and calm seas. At around 21:30, U-46 launched 4 torpedoes at the ship's Canaran and Beta sailing in close proximity. In pursuit of the attacking submarine, the corvette tried to fend off the submarine from the transport, moving away from the convoy for a few days. At this moment, U-101 torpedoed the ship Kreekirk loaded with iron ore, which quickly began to list around 2,200 hours. The ship, losing speed, made its first torpedo attack by 23:55, hitting the larger ship, Kreekirk, and then again around midnight on the transport Siren. At this point, the corvette Gladiolus tried to ram the nearby submarine. The merchant ship Tom discovered a German submarine directly in its path, only 90 meters away. It tried to ram the enemy submarine but soon found itself far away from the convoy with no cover. The submarine U-101 was torpedoed at 1:22, and at 5 o'clock, U-123 finished off the abandoned transport Clintonian. The attack escalated in the heat of the moment, and the convoy escort command decided to leave the area. The corvettes retreated, allowing U-99 to fire torpedoes practically point-blank in the middle of the convoy, without targeting specific ships. As a result, the convoy was described in the War Journal, 2230 shot from the bow tube towards the heavily loaded transport. The torpedo missed, hitting a larger ship nearby, approximately 7,000 tons, which started to sink. 2355 torpedo launched at the large bulk carrier. It hit the bow section up to the bridge. 1:15, constantly hearing the explosions of torpedoes launched by our other submarines. 5 o'clock U-101 torpedoed the ship Tom. At around 1:38, HMS Gladiolus tried to ram the submarine. Eventually, the ships of convoy SC-7 managed to regroup and made for a rendezvous point away from the submarine danger. U-99 attacked again, sinking 20 ships and damaging 6 out of the convoy's 30 ships over nearly 3 days. In the historical literature dedicated to the actions of German submarines during the period from the summer of 1940 to the end of spring 1942, this time is often referred to as the Happy Times. During this period, the Lions of Donitz, as German propaganda called their submariners in World War II, were the undisputed masters of the Atlantic. In 1942, it was a year of. During their greatest triumph, German submarines sank over 2 million tons of Allied tonnage. At the beginning of the war, there were 57 submarines. By that time, there were already 337 submarines in the Kriegsmarine. Nevertheless, in 1943, the Allies gradually began to press the Lions of Donitz at sea, making it inevitable that a special anti-submarine command for the Atlantic Ocean was established. This command was led by Admiral King, who strictly focused on anti-submarine warfare, without being distracted by other tasks. This organizational effort was supported by a massive influx of Allied anti-submarine ships. These ships were equipped with compact radars, rocket depth charges, hydroacoustic stations, and more. All of these technological advancements allowed each ship to independently detect submarines, conduct pursuits relying on their own data, and deliver strikes faster than the German submarines could evade. In the submarine warfare, it wasn't a sudden event, but rather gradual development. However, all of these measures, within a relatively short time, led to the Allies sinking more submarines in one day in May 1943 than the number of transport ships torpedoed by them. By 1945, 709 submarines of Type 7 were constructed, of which 546 were lost in combat, and 65 were destroyed by their own crews. At the end of the war, the fate of the remaining submarines was decided at the Potsdam Conference from November 1945 to January 1946. An operation named Operation Deadlight was carried out near the shores of Scotland, during which over 100 German submarines were sunk using explosive charges or artillery fire from the destroyers Onslow and Bicester. 83 of these belonged to Type 7. A few surviving units joined the fleets of the victorious nations and their allies. U-995 served for a little over half a year in the Kriegsmarine and witnessed the end of the war in the North Sea. In May 1945, the submarine surrendered to Norway and became part of that country's fleet for the next 1.5 decades. With the arrival of new submarine types, U-995 lost its combat value, and the Norwegians transferred it to West Germany as a museum exhibit. The Type 7 program was one of the most successful German programs for submarine construction, especially in terms of the number of units built. It was perhaps the most numerous class of submarines worldwide. As for the quality of the built units, they even surpassed Liberty-class ships, and some argue that Type 7 submarines were the most advanced of their kind. Others simply refer to the Type 7 as steel coffins. These submarines were undoubtedly very effective, but as the history of anti-submarine warfare development shows, they left them with no chance. You could probably compare the Type 7 submarines to a sword, a very powerful and effective weapon in skilled hands, until gunpowder came into play.
Torpedoes, direct front. Smoke screen set. Torpedoes, dead ahead. Enemy destroyer power. Our team has taken the lead. Problem solved, sir.
Enemy cruiser foundered.
Our victory is in sight.